It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about how Catholic art saved the faith is Elizabeth Lev. Thanks for being here, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you for having me.
On the topic of art, do you have a favorite piece of art?
Oh, that's the one my students always ask. I have to admit, I tend to vary a lot. My favorite art changes with my mood. I tend to love always the art of Michelangelo, of Caravaggio, but that doesn't mean that I don't love a beautiful painting by Tissot some days or want to look at a Greek sculpture. So the nice thing about my job is I get to like everything.
How has art played a role in your faith?
Actually played a very big part in my faith, and that's kind of one of the reasons why this book felt very right to write, as it were. For me, when I was studying art history at University of Chicago, I was an extremely secular art historian. I didn't really think about the religious aspect of art. But as the years went by, and one of the types of art history that I studied involved learning the context of art. So if you're going to the Sistine Chapel every day, you're studying the Sistine Chapel, and then suddenly you start thinking about the 40 liturgies a year that take place there, the prayers that are said there, and you begin to look at the art from a lens that says, what if Michelangelo believed this stuff? What if this was something real that they were doing? And then suddenly all the answers began to fall into place. And so really art is what led me back into the faith.
So you give tours in Rome. You mentioned you have students. You teach art history. What has been your experience with others experiencing art? Do they have a similar connection with art and faith that you make, or is that something that you think you had a special experience with?
No, I don't think it's something that's unique or special to me at all. I think it's something that is really very present in many people's experience of art wherever they go. And why we see such an incredible crowd of people. I mean, there's 6.5 million people who stand in line to go to the Sistine Chapel, I think, hoping that they will feel or experience something that's more than just ticking something off a list. And it is true among students, among tourists, among the many, many, many people I've accompanied or been a part of helping them look at art. There are a couple things that stand out. One is art really does, in the words of Benedict XVI, it has the capacity to make us vulnerable, to wound us, the word vulnera meaning wound. So there's something about art that makes us a little bit more receptive, a little bit more open, and that happens very often with either tourists visiting museums or my students getting to know these artists in our class. But the thing, and one of the reasons why I wrote this book, was because I find when I have a number of different people together on a tour, they may come from different religions, different political spectrum, when we stand in front of something really beautiful, all of our differences fade away because we're all looking at something in which we commonly agree that the object is beautiful or that the work of art is beautiful. So art also has the possibility of overcoming differences and making us be on the same platform.
So you mentioned art, people universally agreeing that something is beautiful. What about pieces of art that people might disagree, where some might say it's beautiful and others say, I could have drawn that or something?
It's true. There are many. The other day I was actually in a museum, and I spent most of my time in the contemporary art section, watching people, just sitting quietly, watching people coming and looking at the very, the Mark Rothkos, the works that are very much more challenging to understand. And even then, as people stand together trying to figure out a work of art, they're not saying to each other, oh my goodness, you think that painting is horrible, well, I think you're the worst person in the world. Even there, we even as we discuss or try to articulate why it's not so bad or why we find it not attractive, or my 5-year-old could have done this, even as we're trying to be funny in front of it, it still brings us together until you get to works like shock art, which are really meant to be divisive.
Mm-hmm. So what is the connection then between beauty and truth?
Well, beauty, truth, and goodness is something we figured out in the Christian artistic tradition from the moment we made the Good Shepherd, which, if you remember, in early Christian art, it's the very first image we ever make of Jesus. And when the Christians in the 3rd century try to make something to visualize the Word made flesh, we used, borrowing from the Roman tradition, an image of a shepherd carrying a sheep on his shoulders. and we called it the Good Shepherd, only the word that we used was kalos, which is the transcendental word, meaning not just good, but beautiful and true. So from the very beginning of Christian art, when we tried to express who is this Jesus, we immediately implanted the idea of Jesus is truth, Jesus is good, but Jesus is also beautiful. And in many ways, that is really what the calling of Christian art has been, to proclaim truth and goodness through beauty.
We're talking with Elizabeth Lev, the book she's written, and also I say written, but there's also a ton of pictures in here. This is a really amazing book. How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, the Triumph of Beauty and Truth in Counter-Reformation Art. How did Catholic art save the faith?
Well, in this particular period that the book deals with, we're talking about the wake of the Protestant Reformation. So we're in the late 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century. The Protestant Reformation has many tools at its disposal, one of which is the printing press. So people are inundated with information in the form of pamphlets. You realize 150 million pamphlets were circulating per year in the mid-16th century, many of them written with very polemical language. So the title of On the Institution of the Papacy, which was created by the devil. So can you imagine that kind of clickbait circulating, and people are reading these pamphlets? Then at the same time, people are given choices in religion. Can you imagine the entire existence of Christianity? There's just one Christianity, and boom, there are a whole bunch of Christianities. When you're trying to understand, where am I supposed to go? You keep getting these different answers about sacraments, about do you need saints, don't you need saints? And so what Catholic art did was to use images which are catchy the same way that the titles of the pamphlets were catchy. So they used visual clickbait, if I may use the modern term, to capture the attention of the faithful and to reaffirm truth. So reaffirm the importance of intercession, of the saints, of the angels, to reaffirm the validity of the sacraments and the real presence in the Eucharist, to reaffirm our role in cooperating in our salvation. So this is where Catholic art really found its footing and became a true ally to the faith.
What do you think spawned that? What encouraged it?
It's a beautiful collaboration between lay people and clergy. So we have there's been mistakes across the board. There's been problematic clergy, as you probably everybody knows. Alexander VI Borgia, our famous Renaissance pope who had disgraced the papacy. There are all of these problems. But come the mid-16th century, the church realizes we all have to work together. So you have the outreach on the part of several very high-ranking prelates, one of whom is St. Charles Borromeo, nonetheless. So Bishop of Milan, theologian extraordinaire, who also happens to be a guy who authors a treatise on architecture. And his very good friend was Cardinal Gabriele Paleotti from Bologna, who authored a treatise on painting. And the two of them started commissioning artists, working with artists, so that artists could start producing works of art that would really be helpful, not works of art that are just to show off how clever the artist is or to shock or to amaze, but works of art that would be beautiful, would be very easy to understand, and at the same time would help the faithful see the truth of Catholicism.
Can you give us an example of art being used to fight heresy?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, I think there are about 100 examples. One of the artists that I really liked to talk about, and I used several times in the book, is a very famous artist. This is someone that most of your listeners have heard of. His name is Caravaggio. And Caravaggio is generally known to us as that kind of edgy artist, the bad boy, who's in many ways been co-opted by secular art history as an example of someone who didn't believe a whit of what the church was saying, but made a fortune off the church anyway. And I'm arguing the exact opposite in this book. That when Caravaggio makes a painting of the entombment, and he produces a painting that's supposed to go over an altar in a church built for St. Philip Neri, no less, and he makes this big, heavy, unwieldy body of Christ look like it's hanging suspended in the air. It looks so heavy, like it's going to slip through the arms of the people who are holding him. And the hands of this figure of Jesus come down, and they brush against a stone slab painted into the painting, but painted very cleverly so it juts out. It looks like it's coming into our space and sits right above the space of the actual physical altar. And under that, Caravaggio painted nothing. He left a big empty space, which breaks every single rule in painting. But when you put that painting back in its proper space, you recognize that what is missing in that empty space is the presence of the priest celebrating Mass under the painting. And so there would be the priest lifting the host, saying, "This is my body, which will be given up for you." And you would see the priest filling the space, the stone slab that Caravaggio painted, the host, which would be right where the body of Jesus is, and you walk away from that celebration saying, yes, that is the body of Christ.
And speaking of the Eucharist, you break up the book into three parts: the sacraments, intercession, and cooperation. Can you explain what drew you to present the information in that way?
Yes, as a matter of fact, this is where being a teacher was very, very helpful. I've been teaching a class on Baroque art for Duquesne University for 16 years, and trying to explain this incredible amount of art to a group of students who have never traveled to Europe before and they don't study art history. It became clearer to me that forming a kind of breakdown into this art deals with this kind of question, this art deals with this kind of question, and this art deals with another kind of question was the easiest way for the students to navigate these crazy Italian names are being thrown at them, and almost all of them are Ini or Ani or Oni or something like that. So the other poor kids are like, what on earth? So the book became, and as I began to work on this, again, 16 years of trying to figure this out, it became very clear that you can actually categorize this art as art that was supposed to go up as altarpieces very specifically to tackle problems of sacraments. Then there were works of art that were done specifically to help us really understand that when we dedicate a chapel to Saint such and such or to the martyr such and such, this is what intercession means to us. So in the Protestant Reformation, where the whole idea of intercession, of patron saints or guardian angels or even the Blessed Virgin gets sidelined, these figures come back as really great witnesses in their own lives, but also intercessors for us. And my favorite part of the book, which I think really resonates with my students, is the last part about cooperation and how the Church in the wake of the Reformation confronts the modern world. How are we going to take this message and make it fresh and new for what was then the equivalent of the 21st century? You have Galileo who's showing us the moons around Jupiter. We've circumnavigated the globe. What do we do with women in the Church? All of these questions come to the fore, and they work out pieces of art in order to answer them. It's a thrilling, thrilling period, and very, very similar to ours.
How much do you think the average person that looks at these art pieces understands all of what you're explaining in the book?
Well, I think today there's a little bit of separation between the viewer and the work of art, which is caused by in modern education we don't take into account saint days. Now, if you have the serious daily mass goers, of course they are very well equipped to understand these works of art. But in our day and age, it's a little hard to understand who Saint such and such was, or why, or what saints, and what is Saint Catherine of Alexandria is the patron of philosophy. These things are a little nebulous in our heads, and really, frankly, a lot of our biblical stories are still a little nebulous. So sometimes it takes a little bit of explanation. You need to make a teeny little bridge so the modern viewer can understand what's going on in the painting, and that's really the point of how Catholic art saves the faith. It's to help reconnect that bridge which has been broken. So you may look at the painting and go, yeah, that's really nice, I don't understand it, but all you need to do is fix a few planks, and the viewer can cross that bridge, enter into the painting, and really understand what's going on here.
All right. Well, I could talk to you all day about this, but people are just going to have to get a copy of the book. It's jam-packed full of stories and images of these great pieces of Catholic art. Where can people get a copy of the book?
It's available at Sophia Institute Press, and it's also available on Amazon.
All right. Again, it's called How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, The Triumph of Beauty and Truth in Counter-Reformation Art. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Lev, for joining us today and sharing this with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.